Again, if I can invite everybody to take their seats where they were in the first session of this morning, it greatly assists us as well. And the panel has a line of sight to you. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, our next panel this morning will be very ably led by Ms. Rovani Sigamoney, who is a program specialist in the section for innovation and capacity building in STEM education for UNESCO in our region. This particular panel is going to be looking at barriers and enablers. And it's in fact broken down into 3 different sections and pieces, but we will definitely start with the capacity that we must build into our infrastructure as well as our ecosystem to aiding us with gender parity in the aviation system. And the best place to start, of course, is in education. Please give her as well as her power panel of roses, but also I see 2 thorns have joined us on the stage this morning. A very warm round of applause.
So good morning, everyone. So we're really excited to have you all here, and thank you for coming back so quickly after the break. So we have a short session this morning, but it's going to be quite exciting and interesting, and I'm sure it follows directly from the panel that was on earlier. What's really important in the section is looking at girls in STEM and needing more young women. We have a really diverse team that's actually going to talk about their experiences as well as personal and research experiences in the field of STEM, how it leads into aviation. And I'm sure I don't need to convince you that the reason that we need more women in STEM education to go into careers in aviation and in STEM is because it just makes economic sense. With 50% of our population being women, studies have shown that if we look at ICTs, bringing 60% women more online will rate in a 16 to 18 billion GDP increase in 144 countries around the world. So this shows us that, STEM, ICTs, all this is really important, and I'm really excited for our panel this morning. So firstly, I'm going to introduce you to our first panelist, who you already met in the first panel, who is Justine Sass. And as you know, Justine is the chief for the section of education for inclusion and gender equality at UNESCO. So over to you, Justine.
Thank you. Good morning again, everyone. Oops, sorry. So I'm going to walk you through in this presentation some research that we've undertaken in UNESCO looking at girls in STEM with the recognition that women are half of the equation. Before we can talk about getting more women and girls in STEM, we have to talk about generally unfinished business in education. 1 in 5 children and youth around the world are out of school, and that represents 263 million people, of which 132 million are girls, so roughly over 50%. We also have astounding challenges in adult literacy. 63% of the 749 million illiterate adults are women. That is the same proportion it was in the year 2000. We haven't moved the needle at all on that. We see really big differences also in subject choices. So you heard in the last panel this period of life where students choose their subjects at grade 8, moving into high school, their specialization. And that continues to fall as they go into higher education and into the workforce, as we also saw in that leaky pipeline image that was shared yesterday. What we see is that globally, more women than men graduate from tertiary education, from higher education, but they are not graduating with STEM degrees. In fact, only 35% of all persons that are taking up studies in higher education in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics are women. And if we break that down and look at the specific specialties in that field, we can see enormous differences. For example, here on this slide, the women are represented by the white color. And you can see that women are largely represented in the health and welfare subjects. But as you move along and look at specifically information and communication technologies and engineering, mathematics, and construction, you've got roughly a quarter of those fields that are represented by women, those studies that are represented by women. And these are the fields that we're most interested, I think, in the aviation industry, and where we're likely to see more and more importance of getting women into these subjects. These differences change not only what we see at higher education doesn't happen at higher education. As I mentioned, it happens very much at secondary level. And what you can see here is flipped around so that the women are still in white, but it's looking at secondary school level. So advanced studies in mathematics, you can see here that in most of the countries included in this study, boys represent the majority. 50% is the line in between, the little dotted line that you can see there. And if we look at physics, so if we look at science subjects, you see enormous differences. So that's really where we see the largest gaps. So in this set of countries, none of them have subjects where you've got girls and boys equally represented in these fields. At UNESCO last year, we undertook a study that's called Cracking the Code. And what we wanted to know is, why does this happen? What are the statistics? What are the factors that are influencing girls' subjects? Choice to choose these subjects, their learning achievement, and their progression in these fields. We wanted to know, is it just that girls are not raising their hands? Are they not interested? Do they not want to go into those fields? Is it that they're wired differently? Is there something in the brain structure that makes it such that boys are better in these subjects than girls are? What we found is that there are a complex series of factors that influence a girl's choice to take up these subjects and to continue them. And we present it in what we call an ecological model. And so it's important that we look at the factors that exist both at the level of the learner herself, at the family and the peers that are around her, obviously at the level of the school and what's happening inside of the school and what changes we need to make to the school structure, and the society. And I think we talked about this a lot in the last session. But that it's important that each of these levels are thought about when we think about interventions. And I'm going to go through some of them that I think are particularly important. We looked at endocrinological research. We looked at neurological research. We looked at biological research. There's absolutely nothing that shows that boys and girls are wired differently. And this is even supplemented by the fact that in many countries, girls are doing much better than boys in these subjects. So there's nothing biologically influencing this situation. There are huge confidence issues, though. Self-efficacy is a major factor in this situation. What you can see on this slide is a study that's looking specifically at information and communication literacy. In the countries that are included in this study, what's on the right side is where females are scoring better in information and computer literacy, and on the right side where females are scoring lower. So you can see in these countries, girls are doing better than boys in this topic in all of these countries. But when we ask them about their confidence, are they good at this subject? Do they think that they have advanced ICT skills? They score lower in every single country. So we've got major issues around girls' self-efficacy and beliefs in their abilities. We talked a lot about parents. I'm not going to go into that, but just to say, again, parents have an important role in their education of their children. The media we've also touched on in the last one. Issues about visibility are critically important. So again, looking at this ecological model. And what I'd like to leave on, and what I think that will be touched on by a lot of the other speakers in the panel, are obviously specific to the education system, to the learning environment, and where girls are at secondary level and beyond. Teachers are, if not the most important factor beyond parents. They're the first people that children have exposure to and the longest exposure to beyond their parents in the school system. Their specialization in these fields, their ability to engage girls, their ability to interact in classroom environments in gender-responsive, equal ways is so important, and we need to give them the skills to be able to do that. Access to materials. And some of the studies that we found that because of the gender roles and norms that we talked about in the last panel, girls are often the last to get access to materials. They're the last to get access to lab materials, to ICT materials. They don't run into the classroom to be the first to get the seat to sit at the keyboard. We need to make sure that they have access to materials and that those materials are free from bias, that they include girls in the images and in the texts that are represented in the system. We have to make sure that the way that these subjects are taught are done in very inquiry-based, learning-centered ways, and that girls have access to entrepreneurship opportunities and other ways to build the skills outside of the learning environment. Whether they be camps, whether they be access to museums, whether they be through role modeling, mentorship arrangements, and what have you. And we have to look at ways to bring those role models into the education environment. The Pink Hat group that we saw yesterday, we had them also come with us to China, and they were honored by UNESCO as being a good practice in advancing girls and women's education. We need to look at more opportunities to bring these types of role models into classrooms. We're doing it within UNESCO in a number of different countries, and we recognize that it's just significantly important. I think a lot of these topics will be brought into and delved into in a bit more detail in the next over the course of the panel. But I'd just like to say that it's important that we look at all of these different areas, that the brief introduction that I provided is delved into in great detail in this report, which is called Cracking the Code. I didn't bring copies with me, but we have it available in multiple languages and the links that you can see here. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Justine. So our next speaker is Yashin Brijmohan, who's the Vice President of the World Federation of Engineering Organizations, and he's also the Executive Dean at Monash University of Business, Engineering and Technology.
I think I'm going to start. Thank you very much, and it's always a pleasure and to address you on this occasion, especially on Women's Day. I know that earlier there was a comment about that you need to find some of us to actually bridge the gap, but there was this mention of soft, so I'm not sure whether soft means, whether it means something that is weak, or does meek mean something that is strong. But I just thought that from a world perspective, there's an organization called the World Federation of Engineering Organizations. And in fact, as you would see, these are our standing committees represented by countries around the world, and there's definitely a focus on women in engineering. I just thought of introducing the context for engineering capacity building. And what I've noticed here is that the matters and issues that affect the aviation industry, many of these issues are generic across the STEM industry. So I thought of also addressing some of the more generic issues. And what you would find is that there's a very strong relationship, for example, between the critical mass of educated and skilled engineering practitioners and science, and economic and social development. But I think what is more important is that as we prepare the skills for the future, that some of the competencies that we see today, there are new competencies that are starting to exist. And this would, in fact, influence the way we develop competencies through the educational frameworks. And I think it's important to acknowledge what is changing. So having said that, in a variety of countries around the world, for example, particularly in Africa, we'd find, not just in the aviation industry, but if you look into the future, the number of engineering skills, capability, and practitioners are actually very low. As a matter of interest, if I take South Africa, we are, in terms of ratio to population, we're actually very low. It's around 1 engineer to around 3,600 in terms of the population. And the general average around the world ranges between 1 to 300 and 1 to 800. But another important aspect is around creating educational standards in this industry to enable mobility. And it's all about timing. So it takes a long time to develop engineering capability. And we need to be cognizant in terms of some of the future skills. So what I thought of introducing is that if you just look at that slide, it depends on what age you are, but if you were in the 1940s and 1950s, you would see that that the type of jobs that were available then has drastically changed. And in fact, that was what has been lost in your lifetime. I'm just trying to press this button. It's not working. Okay, it's not moving on. Okay. So, and in fact, if you look at some of the research, these are some of the jobs that are still to come, and maybe some of the jobs that are to be enhanced. And if you look at the education industry more particularly, it's one of the industries that will be severely impacted. Okay, this is definitely not working. All right. This is a very interesting slide. While we are busy in terms of addressing equity, there's a larger context out there in terms of the development of artificial intelligence and the rapidness in terms of the jobs that are to come. So I don't know what the slide says about masculinity anymore. But it is very important that we take this into our context as we prepare for the technology evolution that started to happen. Now, what has happened with the technology explosion that has happened is created an interconnected world. And in this interconnected world, it's given us a new reality, a new way of doing business, new opportunities, but more importantly, new competencies that are starting to come to the fore. And what we need to do is to prepare for this. So we need to move, if you look at the STEM education in the future, it's also affecting the way we start to deliver learning in the actual classroom. And if you look at history, we were more focused in terms of information sharing, and that has now moved to us focusing more in terms of competency development than information sharing, because today information is readily available. But I just thought of just sharing with you some of the emerging skills. And as you can see, there is one that in particular that I'd like to focus on, because many of the aspects that were done today focus on what we call as intercultural competence. And there is a UNESCO operational framework around this. And many of the aspects regarding this specific conference is actually addressed through that framework. And as you can also see, these are some of the new skills that are starting to emerge. So what we need to do is to translate these new skills into an educational framework that we can start to actually adopt. I also want to say that as we develop competencies, it's not just competencies for job employment, it's also around job creation. And there is a significant role that the academic framework in engineering needs to play in this. So the ideology about creating innovation and entrepreneurship and building those key competencies into the engineering framework is actually key in this revolution. I don't want to discuss the statistics, but what I want, my point around the statistics in the aviation sector and in STEM is that there's been a number of research around this. But really, I think we're already at that point where we have some serious indicators. And I think my view is that we need to start to move beyond the statistics into reality and into action. There are a variety of views around the human value systems, and you know what they say is that the popular view is not always necessarily the right view. But I just want to say that it is very important to actually recognize that when it comes to stereotypes, the unfairness, these are humanitarian values. And it is also important that when we recognize these values and a transgression on these values, so gender inequality, it's actually a societal problem. It's not a problem that only women should address. And there is definitely a role for both men and women to play in this. I just wanted to make a few recommendations. There's just 6 of them in terms of transforming the education sector. And the first one has to do is that we already know the statistics, and we need to put in place, in a very systematic way, capacity development programs that in particular focuses on improving the pipeline of women. The second one is that we need to have a strong access and policy system which gives access to the STEM careers across the various countries. The third one speaks to introducing programs to bring across awareness. Now, in engineering, it's very interesting because as much as we've changed some of the engineering paradigms around awareness in terms of choosing careers, we actually now stack at the specialization areas. So, for example, what we're finding is that in certain in the gender parities, women are more likely to choose careers in water and chemical rather than mechanical and electrical. And we also need to go down into that level to make the change. The third one is about market re-entry, because what we find is there is a leaking pipeline. So as much as we have engineering graduates and we're making progress in terms of the number of women that are studying engineering, there is a leaking pipeline. And there needs to be very important policies about re-entry. The next one speaks to the recommendation about introducing systematic programs with a particular focus on innovation and entrepreneurship and business development. And I think this is very important. And finally, I'd just like to re-mention the aspect about incorporating intercultural competence. Now, this is a very important matter. And in fact, this should be introduced in all educational frameworks at a very early stage and in educational systems. Because I think this is one of the competences that's not only a barrier to current progress in business development around the world, but it's also if we do not develop this competence, it will be a significant barrier for us generally as humanity from working with each other. So I would just like to have my last slide, and I'd just like to say that it's always important to respect the roles. And in particular, I just also want to acknowledge the leaders that we see forth here, especially in the engineering space. I think we've made some progress in terms of the leadership in engineering amongst women. And also to just note that the current president of the World Federation of Engineering is a woman, and I think role models are very important. And I think what we need to do is that I like to acknowledge all women for their roles, particularly in engineering today on this occasion of Women's Day. And I think it's about time that we start turning these possibilities for women into reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yashin. I think it's really important to also note that STEM education for women is also for the aviation industry, because to get those young girls into aviation, of course, we need them as engineers, as the pilots, and in every other place in the aviation industry. So I'd like to introduce our next speaker, which is Dr. Lili Zheng, who is a professor of Aeronautics and Astronautics at Tsinghua University in China. So it's the green one, and the red is go back.
Thank you very much. Today is kind of different because for me it's normal to attend a scientific, those kind of conference. But here, most audience are from industry. So it's aviation industry. For my expertise in research part, I did a lot of work related to engine, so which is the heart of airplane. So I know a lot of people working like Boeing. I have a collaboration with them. Also, over 20 years, I work as a professor in United States, Sony Stony Brook, and also back to China, Tsinghua University. So today I'd like to share my thoughts, how education can promote women in engineering, or even towards the aviation industry. I have a list, just a number of questions. First, I try to ask this question: what engineers do? Can you answer me? So usually, as a childhood, I was told engineer basically do the repairment. If your car breaks down, you go to fix it. If you have kind of pipeline or breakdown at home, you also fix it. In the United States, most family will have a house with garage. What's inside the garage? All the tools. So I also try to ask those male audience here. When you bring your child into garage, will you bring your daughter there to do some work? Or you just prefer to give your boys do some work? How many of you will do the thing, bring daughters into, or girls into the garage? Can you raise your hand? That's what I want to point out. That's the start, the most important start for engineers, engineering education for women. So that's a girl start. Then next to the science point of view, that's engineering about. So we talk about the engineering about, lots of people will talk about the STEM program. So science, technology, engineering, and math. So those education for most kids will get equal opportunity. Engineer do an engineering subject will give the girls different perspective education. So that's a question I just want everybody realize this is important. Then next question, which part of the aviation industry has the lowest ratio of women involvement? I'm not expert. Most of you are expert because you are in the industry. Which part? Is it pilot, mechanical? Is it maintenance part? Is it? So pilot part not exactly related to engineering. That's interest driven. When I was in Stony Brook, because it's in the middle of Ireland, that's a North Grumman company located there. Most of my students, male students, can pilot airplane because their parents work in the industry. They feel this is so easy for them, just like drive a car. So that's interest driven. When they are in the environment, there's a social environment, grow up environment, they can do that easily. But not many girls do that. That I can tell you. Because my students will have girls and boys in the college. Then also mechanics which is really related to the engineering because we need to repair something. That's engineers do. Is that right? Kind of right. So then yesterday I listened a lot of talk. So basically want to look at what's the average ratio of female to total students in mechanical engineering major in higher education, which I talk about, that's the college level. So in China, we have a very strict entrance test. So you get high score, you will go to the college. We don't have those, we talk about discrimination or whatever. So girls, as I was a child, I can do whatever I like to do. So this kind of percentage, going to the mechanical engineering, I can tell you about 10% female. So that's not based on discrimination or whatever. That's based on score, selection. So now we have this question answered. Next, we look at college education will provide about 10% of female. So if all those female going to the engineering subject or engineering industry, that's the number. How many of them will go to the aviation industry? You can think about. You cannot exceed this type of number. So effort we have made in the college, we try to, from the primary school, high school, and university, we try to inspire, encourage females doing the engineering job or interested in engineering. I did a lot of work, try to inspire all those female students. So we made an effort. We also have lots of programs. I will not talk about it. But from college level, we already got this data. In order to increase the number of females involved in engineering, most important part should start from early education. So most of us will talk about that's from the primary school or high school. Is that right? But I will talk about should go back to family level. That's most important. Why I have evidence? Because right now I'm in the aerospace department. Before I came here, I asked, that's a last year entry student, I asked those female students, why you choose School of Aerospace? Then most of them told me, because my parents work in the field. So that's a family influence. If our daddy can bring girls into graduate world, I believe we have more women in engineering. So this is the first part. We should start, do it from now on, from our family. Then the last part, yesterday I talked with my colleague in Aviation Institute. I asked them, why the number of female in pilots is so small, lowest level. Then in China, we only have two or three aviation institutes to train the pilots. I was told one of the colleges, they only train about 200 female pilots. During last how many years, I don't know exactly. That's I was taught until now. So how many male pilots? That's a lot, because we have a fast developing airline industry, need a lot of pilots. So that's, then I asked why. I was told because industry wouldn't welcome them. So basically, don't like to give them the job opportunity. Under those circumstances, even we trained students getting into pilot license, they cannot get a job. So this is a part of discrimination. So my suggestion would be, from the industry point of view, probably every year we should give some target number. We need the female pilots. Can you train to get recruitment? So that's the industry should do. Okay, my talk stops here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lili. That was great. And so going from China, we now go to the American perspective. And we have Dr. Renetta Tull, who's the professor at the University System of Maryland and an expert in diversity and inclusion in Latin America and the Caribbean.
Thank you. Thank you, and good morning, everyone. So let me get my first slide up. It's already here. My little Twitter bird, it didn't quite line up. I understand that we have a limited amount of time this morning, so I did put my Twitter there if anyone wants to engage on Twitter, and I'm very happy to answer any questions. So I am just very pleased to be here from the United States as a guest of UNESCO. I thank them for their invitation. I also thank them and the ICAO for inviting me. I also want to thank Antonia De Moensi and Verna Batias, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. They welcomed me so warmly yesterday when I came in with my travel clothes on, and I was just so happy to be here. I am the product of slaves, and so this is my first time on the continent of Africa. And having been here, thank you. As a woman who is a descendant of slaves, it is just very humbling to be here on the continent. So in the United States, I wear several hats. I am a professor of the practice in humanitarian engineering at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, also known as UMBC. It's near Washington, D.C. And my background is in electrical and rehabilitation engineering. I work within a lot of diverse populations, connecting them to STEM and higher education. And as Rovani said, I also serve as the vice president for the Latin and Caribbean Consortium of Engineering Institutions. I work within groups such as the Student Platform for Engineering Education Development, also known as SPEED, and I work with groups of students, young men and women from around the world, and particularly in Latin America, on international teams and helping them to form international teams to address challenges that are presented by the Sustainable Development Goals. Also, as an associate vice provost for my university and director of programs that serve as a system for the system of the 12 institutions within the University System of Maryland, I have an opportunity to found and develop new programs that serve as models to increase participation of people, particularly from underrepresented groups in STEM, and help them to get into PhD programs. And I'm going to be using that term quite a bit. It's one of the ones that we use in the US, underrepresented, people who are underrepresented, sort of, some people use the term minority. In some cases, we don't always like to use that term because we don't want to feel as less than, so we use the term underrepresented from a population point of view. It usually includes people like me, from African American descent, Hispanic, Latino descent, indigenous people in the United States, Native American, Pacific Islanders, Native Alaskans in the United States. That's the context that we use when I'm using that term of underrepresentation. One of the key programs that I have, particularly for graduate students in Maryland, is called Promise. And this particular program addresses several challenges that diverse graduate students, people who are postgraduate, issues that they face related to diversity and inclusion, such as implicit bias. We also talk about things like stereotype threat. This was made popular by Claude Steele, Dr. Claude Steele, that feeling that where people don't perform as well because they perceive that they are going to be looked at as less than. And so even though they have the intelligence and the brilliance, their performance can be lacking. Imposter syndrome is another one brought famous by Clance and Imes. And in the imposter syndrome, this research you probably are familiar with, they had women who were in the classroom and they performed as less than what their brilliance would have put forth because somehow all of a sudden they felt that they did not belong. And sometimes that's perpetuated by the faculty, sometimes it's perpetuated by other students in the class, but it's a very real feeling that can come over women where they don't perform as well because of the imposter syndrome. All of these are based on expectations of either success or failure. And the pipeline for engineering, specifically in my example, is quite stark. It needs work. So I'm going to share some statistics next. In terms of women who are underrepresented in engineering, and again, I'm using that term underrepresented, and looking at graduate students within the US, the numbers are incredibly small. As you can see, I'm going to skip straight to African American, 2.6%. So when I was in graduate school, I went to undergraduate at Howard University, which is an historically black university in Washington, D.C., graduate school at Northwestern. So I was in these kinds of numbers where they are in the single digits in terms of percentage. Hispanic, Latino, 4.3%, American Indian, Native Alaskan, so much smaller, 0.17%. Those who are in the Native Hawaiian category, 0.06%. And so you see that when you combine all of that together, we're talking about a pipeline, even through graduate programs, only 7.1%. Now that brings me to faculty, because I strongly believe that faculty are the multipliers. And so when we look at faculty, and particularly women faculty in engineering, we can see that if you have over 27,000 people who are engineers and who become professors, only in my category, people who are like me, black women, 100 out of that 27,000. And so when we start to think about who our faculty are going to be, we have quite a bit of work that we need to do. And I was interested in looking at women graduate students in aerospace engineering. We've already heard a little bit about that in terms of aerospace engineering. So if we look at aerospace engineering and all of the graduate students there, the numbers are small to begin with. So 5,116. But if we look at aerospace engineering and the number of women in aerospace engineering, there are only 775. Now, when we then look at those who are underrepresented, 1.4%. 1.4%. The numbers there are incredibly low. So when we talk about supply and demand, we see that the supply is low. So what are some of the things that we've learned? What can we recommend? Number one, thinking about increasing women's STEM faculty. Women and girls are influenced by other women. We know that. We've heard about that already. Women instructors matter. Women faculty matter. Representation matters. Faculty, professors, they're the multipliers, and women faculty who have had unique experiences and who have been where other women want to be have great power to influence scores of young women, and for that matter, women of many ages. They need to be trained, hired, and empowered to do so. Number two, an invitation to engage. That's imperative. My colleague from back in Maryland, Dr. Autumn Reed, and I wrote a paper a few years ago that was presented in Italy about the importance of inviting young women to be part of our sectors. We need more women in aviation. We already know that. That's why we're all here. We need to invite them to engage at every level, continuously. And there's a study in social science, Carl Johnson wrote about STEM identity, science identity, and how people need to see themselves as scientists and engineers, but they also need to be recognized by significant others, people who are in certain hierarchies who recognize them in that role. We need to think about even play, and I think we heard about this in the earlier panel. This computer science sector looked at reasons why girls were lagging in computer science, and we can learn from this. One of my former Promise students, who is now a computer science professor at the University of Puerto Rico, Rio Piedras, Dr. Patty Ordonez, was interviewed about this on National Public Radio in the US, and the discussion focused on play. There was a point years ago where computers, for example, were marketed as a toy to boys. And entertainment, it was for boys. Girls were left out of that kind of discussion. And so do we see parallels in aviation? I was thinking about something very, very simple, right? The toy airplane that we played with when we were young. And there was a question about tools in the garage. You know, do we take our girls into that? And when I was in Australia, I was given a model of an Airbus 380. And I love this. I had to wait until I was an adult to actually get one of these models. I never had one as a child. And so I thought about that, and one of the reasons that I brought it all the way with me on the plane to Africa from the US, just to in a way, just hold it, just to remember that our girls need these kinds of models as well. And so do we even talk about the beauty of flight? Do we talk about the wonders of aerodynamics with our girls? We need to spread the joy. We need to share that joy. So we need to invite girls and women to engage in STEM activities and careers. And then finally, altering attitudes. When I was in London recently in June, there was this article that was in the Financial Times. Women's airline careers are stuck at low altitude. And there was this article about one of the chief CEOs and the remarks that no female could do his job. You might remember this. This was part of the article. And so we really need to change our attitudes about what women can do, how far they can advance, how they participate. We need to expand our minds about what professionals in aviation look like so that we can include attention to work-life balance. We can think about things related to maternity leave, child care, normalization of the use of the policies, appreciation for the beauty of different skin tones and hair types and cultures within the workplace, and things like this. I really enjoyed seeing this when I was on my flight for South African Airlines, and it was just so empowering to see this cover. And we need to have more of this more often. And so I applaud the magazine. I applaud all of the airlines and the industries who are bringing up their women, who are making sure that women are included and are put out front to be the images, because these are the kinds of things that are going to help us when we're teaching other women that they need to come up, that they can be pilots, that they can be leaders in the aviation industry, that they can do all of the same kinds of jobs. And so I appreciate that. And again, thank you very much for inviting me to be here, and it's been a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you very much, Renetta. And what's quite interesting that comes out is that we find that the problem that we have of not enough girls in STEM is not a north-south divide or a developing versus developed country. It's all over the world where we have this problem. And so now bringing it back to South Africa, we have Dr. Noxolo Kubeka Dlamini, who's the group manager for architecture and strategy for Airport Company South Africa.
Thank you, Rovani, for the introduction and for the opportunity to address all the delegates on such a very important topic of STEM. You see, STEM for me is very close to my heart. It's personal for a few reasons, really. One, I've got 2 girls that I'm trying to interest into STEM so that they can become part of the pipeline. You heard yesterday, there were talks and discussions around the pipeline that can actually contribute and participate meaningfully into the economy. So I would really like to see my girls being one of those people that have that advantage. The second one is around experience. Based on my experience, I would really hope that the young, up-and-coming girls do not have to go through some of what some of us had to go through. I'm going to share with you, if you allow me, what I mean about experiences. A few years ago, I had an opportunity to lead a 7.2 billion rands worth of project. It was a technology engineering project. As you can imagine, it was run by engineers, mostly white males, and they couldn't really understand as to why the leadership would make a decision to put a young black female to be at the heart of actually managing such a big program. This program obviously was an engineering program. It was trying to digitize the railway and make sure that we improve on our safety stats, because at the time we had a lot of safety-related incidences. In terms of the performance, we were not performing very well, so we needed to actually improve on some of the operational efficiencies. At that time, it was an era of big data, beginning of big data era, where customers were actually complaining to say, each time we call fried rail, we don't really get a view as to where our $1 million consignment is. And we needed to actually plug in a number of technologies which made up of this program so that you could have visibility of all the consignments, visibility of the assets in terms of where they were in the pipeline, in the network, and also to just help in terms of improving the efficiencies as well as availability of these assets through support and maintenance. The third one, which is also very personal for me, and I wouldn't be standing here if it wasn't for that. I am a beneficiary of investments such as these ones, where a company took time to see a potential in me and give me an opportunity to give me a bursary to go to university. And I wonder where would I have been had I not gotten that opportunity. And what I would like to, thank you. And what I would like to highlight is that it wasn't until I was doing matric that I got to know there was something called information technology. I didn't. At the time, I was planning on becoming a chartered accountant, and this opportunity obviously was presented to me through one of the teachers in my school who made sure that they put me through the program. Obviously, it was a rigorous program where one had to obviously compete, and based on your performance, you then get afforded an opportunity to get to the second round where you get to be interviewed. That was the very first interview that I had. One, I didn't even know what to expect from an interview. Then again, there was a lady. I remember her name. Her name was Nwanda. I used to call her Sis Nwanda. She came to me and she said, look, the competition is fierce, but you have an opportunity because of the area in which you come from. I come from KZN. So she said to me, you know what, there's a company that's looking for people or students that are keen on technology. And I'm thinking, technology? What is this? This was back in 1996. And they may just be open to actually sponsor someone from their area, because I think it was 5 of us at that time. I had to obviously make arrangements to call my dad to say, Papa, there is this opportunity, but I don't even know what information technology is. And at that time, I didn't have anyone to call upon to actually explain this, let alone to prepare for the interview. So when I went to an interview, I had to deal with the fear of being interviewed. And I also had to obviously put up a brave face and pretend that I knew something about information technology, which I did. To cut a long story short, earned myself a bursary even before I matriculated, and here I am. I'm going to be, the first slide obviously is talking to the STEM barriers. The first one that I would like to talk to you about is the socialization of youth, which for me is key in the sense that there is this perception that STEM is masculine. It's not, there's nothing masculine about it. There really isn't. STEM is just STEM. It depends on the interest, it depends on the capabilities, which I believe women and girls do have the capabilities and abilities, and they're actually very able. And we as parents, we are also guilty because of how we're socializing the young girls and boys, socializing the girls to believe that maybe not, they need to be focusing on courses that are more oriented towards family or homemaking and stuff like that because of their past experiences, and we're socializing boys to believe that they can be anything that they want to become. And why don't we do the same for our girls? And it's to a point that even the discussions that we have in our home setting, home environment, is such that we encourage and invest more time in talking to boys and about STEM concepts than we do with the girls. If you really go back and think of how you're engaging with the girls, I'm sure you can attest to this. Sometimes I'm guilty of it, but I have to consciously make an effort because of the interest that I have for my girls. The second one is cultural and social norms, where there is this conflict. Home and work environment, home and school environment, where you find that there are policies, practices, and belief systems that are conflicting with one another. When the girls are home, we're telling them something different. When they go to school, we've got different expectations in terms of their performance. Folks, it starts at home, so that it makes it easier for the girl child to actually even be open to or be interested in STEM-related courses. And there's another one around women being held to dual expectations in the workplace. What we often find, and we experience it even today, is that when you are in a boardroom, there's an expectation for you to obviously be authoritative, in a sense to prove that you actually can and you deserve being in the boardroom. But at the same time, there's an expectation that you're going to be a softie, you have that feminine touch. things that men don't necessarily have to deal with. So if you're in a boardroom and you're a woman, you constantly have to juggle between two roles. So it's very key for us women to know when to capitalize on that, when to try and create that gap, and make sure that you step up your authority, but at the same time, so that you do not lose the teams and win the teams, you know when to be approachable, when to be open. The third one is around stereotypes. We spent a lot of time on this yesterday, gender-related stereotypes. The problem for me with this is that it actually creates a perception and a belief amongst young girls that they actually are not good enough, that they're not capable, because if from an early age, from a very young age, yes, the stereotypes around you, with the people that you see at home, the people that you see at church, it's being reinforced in terms of what they're saying, the messages that they actually are communicating. It becomes a problem. And looking at the negative comments and low expectations of girls, because these are really harmful. In fact, they even prevent girls from dreaming big. Even if they see an opportunity and they are interested in something, but because of the barriers that have been put to them, they end up not even looking at those opportunities. The last one around the barriers, it's the unconducive work and environment. One example that I would like to highlight on the program that I highlighted, we were designing handhelds, but because the handhelds were actually, the specification was put together by the technical team. What happened? They designed a handheld that had everything that you could think of in terms of the capability, functionality, and it was performing, and it was recognized, and all of those things. But they forgot that they're actually women who were yard officials. And they couldn't carry this big thing because it was too heavy. And can you imagine when you're building a train and you have to walk the length of the train carrying this thing? And then another mistake that was made to try and correct that initial mistake from a design point of view, they then designed some straps that women could use to put or carry the handheld devices. Guess what? The design was also wrong because the straps were interfering with the boobs. So those are just a few examples from an economics point of view. I'm not even going to mention issues around family life balance. And then maybe quickly moving to some of the myths. These are the myths, you know them, that we need to be debunking, where there's a belief or myth that boys possess more innate STEM ability than girls. There are many others. This is another one, which I would like to highlight around classroom interventions that work to increase girls' interest in STEM, turning off the boys. So these are the discussions that we, as mothers and fathers, needs to be having with the girls to say, what messages are we sending to the girls? Do we make them feel comfortable about who they are and their abilities? Because, I mean, if you're a young girl, especially teenage girls, it's nice to feel, lovely and sexy. So can you imagine your daughter being put off on such an opportunity, a good career, because it's not sexy? There is that myth that it's not sexy to be an engineer. Yeah, okay. Okay, statistics, I'm not even gonna talk to this. I put this picture just as an example of some of the things that we can do as parents. The little girl on your, is it your right? I think it's your right, but my left, wearing glasses is my 6-year-old daughter. She's, this is on a, yeah, this is on, they're having what is this? It's a STEM class where they're actually doing science-related initiatives. It's a private tutor. So those are some of the initiatives or things that we can do even at a personal level to try and encourage young girls to participate. We all know about the hidden figures, where we've got women, mathematician, self-taught computer programmer, as well as an engineer. We know the role that they played in terms of the history in the US. Need I say more? We're running out of time. I'm trying to rush. These are some of the examples of some of the STEM inventions that changed the world by women. You're looking at your fiber optic, you're looking at your gas-powered heating, you're looking at your solar heating. You can read there, even if you're looking at the switch, means women have been doing this for years, for millennia, but for some reason, it's put under the carpet. And there's also an economic, sorry? Okay. Yeah, we've run out of time. This slide was talking to the economic imperative for STEM education, to say it's not just about the development of goals, but also as countries we can actually benefit from that. These are some of the enablers, things that we can do to actually challenge the status quo. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nxolo. And finally, to get a few examples of what ICAO is doing for our young people in STEM, we have Henry Goji, who is the Head Strategic Planning and for Coordination and Partnership at ICAO.
Thank you, Rovani. And good afternoon, everyone. I'll try to be very quick. I know everyone is hungry, and we don't have very much time. First thing I just want to do is answer one of Lili's questions. I have 3 children, all grown up, all girls, and yes, they worked in my garage, and yes, they even played and worked in my hangar. So for this presentation, I would like to just showcase ICAO's Next Generation of Aviation Professionals program. We have heard yesterday in session 3 some of the details on the Sustainable Development Goals. I had mentioned with the adoption of the 2030 Agenda, sustainable air transport was reinforced as an enabler for sustainable development. So of special note and interest to everyone in this room for this particular conversation is SDG 4, ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. So the SDGs really are about partnerships. So we cannot achieve these goals without working together. Now, so for SDG 4 in particular, we must work with our UN partners, states, academia, and industry to achieve this goal. And this brings me to talk about ICAO's NGAP program. So just to put a little bit into perspective, we've heard some numbers, but some facts and figures to realize the sheer scope and the significance of the world's air transport network and the challenges we have before us. Our sector today supports the employment of no fewer than 62.7 million people worldwide, and it generates $2.7 trillion each year in GDP. Even today, we're struggling to hire the qualified experts in the aviation field. When considering that traffic growth and the rate is expected to double by 2030, and the employment figure will grow to 99 million, this means a considerable more talented and educated experts in the aviation field are needed. So we need to embrace and to take on board the advantage of the 50-50 goal in our sector and at all levels. It is for these reasons that ICAO has developed the NGAP program. So the program brings together states and educational institutions, the UN and other stakeholders to attract, educate, and retain the next generation of aviation professionals. And this can only be accomplished through these partnerships, working together with the national and international bodies responsible for education and labor. Our goal, of course, is to see a global aviation community that has sufficient, competent human resources to support the safe, secure, sustainable air transport system for today and the needs of the future. To help accomplish this, the program focuses in 5 areas. I'll just highlight very quickly. We engage with UN organizations and government bodies. That includes the aviation community and education sectors to promote activities that support the future aviation personnel needs. We work with universities and industry to identify and implement the effective strategies to adequately prepare the next generation of aviation professionals. We interact with the research community, develop solutions to address current and future global aviation challenges, and to support the aviation planning and development. And finally, we develop the tools and provisions for ICAO member states and the international civil aviation community that will assist them in implementing effective strategies to attract, educate, retain the next generation of civil aviation professionals. Pretty much what we have been hearing about challenges. Now, while ICAO will work with its partners, we also expect and need states, academia, and industry to collaborate and with one another, making high-quality aviation-related education available and accessible to all, and of course, exposing girls and boys to the range of opportunities in the aviation field. Finally, in helping to achieve all this that I have said, ICAO is organizing yearly the NGAP Global Summits. The NGAP Summit provides a unique opportunity to meet and share experiences with others involved in the NGAP outreach activities around the world. The next summit will be held in Shenzhen, China, 12 to 13 December. It's coming up, and we hope to see most of you there to join the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Henry. And in closing, I would like to thank all the panelists. So another round of applause for everyone. And I think taking away from this session, what we can say is that we need to do more to get more girls in. We need to start younger at a primary school level, and we need to put in more policies in place and have more programs similar to NGAP that we can get more young women into STEM and into aviation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Rovani and her panel for their well-researched and articulated thoughts, experiences, as well as the data that they have collated from the various institutions that they come from. You know what they say, a nation that disregards the education of a youth has also a nation that has disregarded the development of its future. Ladies and gentlemen, at this point in time, we are going to take our lunch break. And thank you very much to the people at the Airports Company of South Africa who have very kindly sponsored our lunch today. Please give them a very warm round of applause. Throwing forward to our program this afternoon, we're going to be running a tight set, but perhaps one of the most interesting sets of panel discussions are coming up, starting, of course, with the high-level conversation that will include the Deputy Minister of Transport of South Africa, our Executive Director of UN Women, as well as the Secretary General of ICAO directly after lunch. Therefore, I do ask you, ladies and gentlemen, that when the bell rings, you've all heard the bell in the various corridors, when the bell rings, if we can move back into this room as quickly as we possibly can, just also in consideration of the fact that this entire event is currently being live streamed to our audiences around the world at the moment. So as far as possible, we are trying to recover time to make sure that even those who are joining us from different locations don't miss out too much and we don't leave them behind in this all-important conversation. We will see you after lunch. Enjoy.